Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For today's tutorial, I'm going to show you another Valentine's themed cake. For this one, I colored my wafer paper and I made 3D hearts with this wafer paper. And I also will show you how to do a stencil that is not going to rub off. First of all, we're going to start with the wafer paper. We're going to color it. And this is how I decided to do it this time. Wafer paper can be notoriously kind of hard to get a concentrated color on. And I have found that the easiest way for me to do it is to actually just combine my colored luster dust or petal dust, whatever you prefer to use. I'm using luster dust because it has a sheen on it, and I like that for this design, with some vegetable oil. Now it will leave your paper a little slippery, because it's still going to have that vegetable oil on the surface, but it doesn't curl up like if you were to use your airbrush and airbrush your wafer paper. I needed these pieces of paper to stay crisp and flat, so that's why I decided to go with this. And you get a much more of a saturation of color than you would if you just used a dry brush with your luster dust. Now, I will link in the video description where I got this color palette. All these colors work together. There's a burgundy, which looks kind of brown on the wafer paper, but I think it still all worked well together. But there was a red, a burgundy, a pink, and a rose gold. And they all came in the same box, so they are definitely made to work together. Now I set that aside, and I'm just rolling out my fondant and cutting it to the size of the cake. I measured the circumference and the height of the cake and cut it to that size. I also cut out a disc of fondant for the top. Now this is how I'm going to color this or do my stencil. I'm just using this regular stencil, and I am rubbing some cornstarch, some shortening on the back of it. Now stick it to your fondant, and that shortening is going to get it to stick. I would not put the shortening on the fondant. Leave it for the stencil, and I'll show you why. Because you don't want your fondant to have a coating of shortening on it when you do this technique. I'm covering up the section that I'm not working with yet with some saran wrap, just to keep it from getting over dusting. And this is the rose gold that I'm using. And what I'm doing is I'm brushing on the Everclear. Instead of mixing the Everclear with the luster dust and then airbrushing it or brushing it on, which can be kind of streaky, I went ahead and I just dampened the fondant with the Everclear, and then I'm dry dusting over the top of it. I haven't done this technique before, but I really like it. I have done this with just shortening and luster dust a while ago on a video. And it worked fine, but the problem I had with that was that it wanted to rub off very easily. And this is going to work just like if you made a paint out of it. It's the same idea. You're just applying it in two stages instead of mixing them together and then applying it. But I like this better. And once I got it on and all of it dusted, then I went back over it with more. Because what that did is it kind of buffed it to a shine. Does that make sense? And the piece that I needed for the cake just so happened to be the same height as this stencil. So if you had a piece of fondant that was taller, you would want to cover it up with saran wrap also, wherever you're not applying your stencil. Right here is where I'm going back over and dry dusting it on top of the already painted fondant. And you can see how it just kind of gives it that extra luster. And look at that. That is perfect. I love how that worked out. Now I would suggest letting that part dry first before you move on to your second section, but you know, I have no patience. So I went ahead and just put the stencil on the other section of this piece of fondant, covered up the original piece. This does dry very fast though, guys. It was fine. It worked out just fine. But to be on the safe side, if you have not done this before and you don't have maybe as much experience as I do, or you're just nervous about it, just let it dry first. And then I did not reapply any more shortening onto the stencil, the back of the stencil. I just used it. It still had residue of the shortening on it. Now I kind of crossed my fingers with this that it was going to be fine, and it was. Otherwise, you're going to have to wash off the entire stencil, dry it off, reapply, and this worked out just fine. And I tried to line it up as good as I could to have a continuous pattern. And there was just two little spots there that there's a little bit of a gap. But other than that, I think it worked out just fine. And I set that to the side to let it firm up and dry. Maybe about 15-20 minutes. Just because it's easier to transfer fondant or fondant wrap onto your cake if it has had time to firm up a little bit so it's not stretching and pulling when you're transferring it over. So in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and put my circle piece on the top, turn it upside down. I attach that with just some shortening, and I'm removing the excess with a sharp knife. It's so much easier to do a wrap like this if you turn your cake upside down. Then you get that sharp corner, that sharp edge around the top. Then I just gently lifted up that piece, and I'm cutting off the excess, overlapping them, cutting off the excess just like you do with wallpaper, if anybody has any experience with that. The only thing I would do different with that is I would cut off that extra white strip on the top and have that more on the bottom of the cake. But I think it was still fine. So I left it that way. And then I set that to the side to set up, and I'm just wrapping the bottom tier that was already, all these cakes are my, I guess they're called Franken cakes. I've heard that term. They've been reused. These are not to be served. So I'm just reusing cakes that have already been filled and crumb coated. And to attach the wafer paper, I like to use fondant. You can do it on buttercream, but it can be a little temperamental when it comes to condensation. So I prefer to do wafer paper on fondant or on another piece of wafer paper and then wrapping that around the cake. But if you want to do buttercream, the thing I would suggest is to brush the back of the wafer paper that's going to be touching the buttercream, brush on some melted cocoa butter. That kind of protects the wafer paper a little bit. That's how you can be a little safer and a little bit more secure about how it's going to work out, is to do that. And then I'm making the topper. I just kind of brushed, I use paper towels to kind of get some of the extra oil off of the wafer paper. There's still going to be some residue, but just go ahead and do that extra step. Then I'm just lining these up. I had folded them in half first, and I'm just attaching them to each other with just water. That's all I used. And then fold them in half, and I attach them together, the folded sections together. And then just set that aside and let that dry. And see, you can see that this is, it looks more like a rusty brown, but it's actually the burgundy color. Again, it's not what I would have preferred, but I still like how it looked. And I also wiped off the extra oil off of these pieces of paper too. I'm trying to remember how many pieces I did for each color. I think I did 4 or 5 pieces of, no, 4 or 5 pieces of wafer paper for each color. And what I would suggest, if you are doing this technique on an 8-inch double barrel cake, double that. Because what ended up happening was I did not have enough of these heart shapes. And that was just a punch cutter, a heart-shaped punch cutter that I found on Amazon. And I will link that in the video description where you can get that. You might not get it in time for Valentine's Day this year, but all you have to do is use your cutters, your heart-shaped cutters, if you have those, and trace them out like I did for the larger heart. And then just use that as your template. So I folded all of these in half, and I'm attaching these to each other a little differently than I did the topper. I am leaving them in a folded shape and just lining them up side by side. Does that make sense? So each one that I'm adding there is one heart folded in half. And then I'm attaching to another one piece that is one heart folded in half. And that's just water that's on that plate. I'm just dipping them in water just on the edge and kind of squeeze the pieces together where they are. It's kind of like the binding of a book is what it reminds me of. Squeeze that together, make sure that they are stuck together, and allow them to dry for approximately, I would say, half an hour to an hour. But what I'm doing here before they're fully dry is I am pulling them apart a little bit so you get that fanned out look. Otherwise, if they dry completely, if you try to separate them and spread them out, they will crack. So here is just one heart. I think I had attached two together. What I did was 5 hearts for each one. I thought that would be enough, but I would use 10 hearts for each individual heart. And yeah, just do twice as many as what I did. So in this video, I do not have enough to wrap around the entire cake, but you get the idea. So I just went with it. I'm just using some piping gel that I'm brushing on the back there. And piping gel won't warp it, not like water. Do not use water for this. And then I'm just going every other color. What I was going for was a look of having them diagonally be the same colors in rows, diagonal rows. We're going to speed it up here because this took a little time. And yeah, I just line them up on top of each other. You could try to set them in between, like your first row, you have them side by side, and then the next row, kind of set them in between each heart. You could try for that too. I thought about it, but I knew that this was going to look good, so I just went with that. As you can see there, I did not have enough to wrap around. Oh well, live and learn. So do 10 hearts per heart. And then once you get them on there, go back in and kind of redefine the separation. I did spread them out. I don't show you that because I had stopped filming. It was late in the day. It was 7 o'clock at night. I've been doing this all day. So I had turned my camera off, but I went back in and spread them out a little bit more. And then just stuck the toppers on the top, one with the wire, and then some piping gel for the other ones. And here's our final product. I hope you liked it. I hope you get something from it. I hope you give it a try. All those things. And please like, subscribe, share, comment, and we'll catch you on the next one.